which sewing notions to get and what sewing tools you need can be a pretty hard choice when you go in the store and see all the options. But as you can see, I've laid out all the materials that you would use on a daily basis to let you know you don't need that many. There's only about 10 items that you would need on your everyday sewing projects. So let's go ahead and get through those. Okay, now that we know each other's name, let's just go ahead and get into the materials that you will need. First thing you'll need is some sewing pins or sewing clips. Now you will need these obviously to keep your sewing pieces together. So you don't want to just let them be freely running under your machine, because then you could be risking letting the edges get misaligned, making important placements get misaligned. So you want to have you some fabric clips or fabric pins. Now, why I would say you need some fabric clips is because sometimes you have thicker fabrics that'll make it hard for you to use your fabric pins. It may be hard to, get them in there. So then that's where your fabric clips come in handy. Also, you have some fabrics that are delicate and they leave holes, like some silks and some leathers. You don't necessarily want those holes to be left there, so that's where you would use your fabric clips. But you can use fabric clips whether your fabrics are delicate or regular. So that's how I would say, get one or the other, or you could be like me and go ahead and have both, so you won't have to worry about if you have them or not. Next, you will need you some thread. Black and white is going to be your #1 used thread colors in your sewing room, so you want to go ahead and start off with those. You're always going to need black or white thread, okay? But of course, you're going to have to get you more colors because you will need your thread to match your fabric. You want those threads to match with your fabric. That's, automatic. And since you're going to need your sewing thread, you're going to need bobbins. Now, this bobbin case is usually sold separately. You won't necessarily always get bobbins and a bobbin case together. But as you can see, I have plenty of them. And I have plenty colors because your bobbin thread always needs to match your top thread. Only time you would use a different color bobbin thread is if you're using 2 different color fabrics. So you may need a different, fabric color for one side. Like, for instance, you may need black for one side and white for the other because you're using black and white fabric at the same time. But you will always need a bobbin and multiple bobbins because you're going to fill them up. And if it's full, how would you use another one for a different color? So definitely invest in multiple bobbins. You will also need 2 pair of scissors. One for your fabric, one for your paper. You will never use your fabric scissors for paper, and you will never use your paper scissors for fabric. You need your fabric scissors to stay as sharp as they possibly can at all times so that you get crispy cut edges when you're cutting your fabric. And when you get paper scissors, you can use any kind of scissors. You can even get the little dollar cheap wool scissors. You just need them to only be used for your papers. Next, you will need some different sewing needles, okay? Now, when you're first starting out, you don't have to buy every single one that you see, but eventually you will need multiple types of sewing needles because they're used for different things. You have ballpoint, you have stretch, you have microtex, and you have denim. So it all depends on the type of fabric that you're using, on what type of needle you're using. But you definitely want to have a lot of universal needles because you can use universal needles on almost all fabrics. And you have to change your needles out. You can't just use one forever. It doesn't work that way. It's going to lose its sharpness and you're going to need to change that. So you want to make sure you definitely have a couple things of universal needles. Along with the needles that go into your machine, you're going to need some hand needles. You can get these anywhere and they're usually always cheap. And these here are tapestry needles. I use these to weave in the ends of my serger threads, because you cannot just cut your threads when you're using a serger, and your serger also don't backstitch. So you would want to go ahead and weave those loose serger threads back into those stitches. So that's where your tapestry needles would come in hand. You'll also need you a tape measure. You're going to have to take your body measurements. If you don't know your body measurements, you won't be able to make a pattern. You won't be able to use a pattern. Well, technically you'll be able to use them, but how would you know they're your size and you don't even know what size you are? So you want to have you a tape measure, because you're going to need to take your own measurements. You may need to, measure all kind of different things. So you need tape measures on hand. Also need you some tailor's chalk. As you can see, I have more than one color, because these are used to make markings on your fabric. So if you have any cut lines, any notches, any type of lines and markings that you may need, so you can reference back to where pieces need to lay, you will need something to be able to recognize those. So I have white, yellow, red. They come in other colors as well. You want multiple colors, because if you're using a white fabric or a light fabric, white may not always show up. So you're going to need another color so that you can see those lines. And because you may be drawing lines, you're going to need you a clear ruler. You want this ruler to be clear so that you can have a clear visual if your lines are straight, if you have it lined up to the edge of your fabrics. You want to be able to see if you're lining up your ruler straight, because just because you have a straight ruler don't mean your line will be straight. We've all drawn a crooked line with a ruler. That's why I only get clear rulers, because I'm not finna be redrawing lines all day. So get you a clear ruler if you want to save yourself a headache. Now, I don't care if you've been sewing for 2 days, 2 years, or 20 years. Everybody needs a seam ripper, because everybody mess up when they sewing. I don't know one person that ain't never messed up on a sewing project. So you want to keep you a seam ripper so that you can take those stitches that you messed up out and then get back to business, okay? Lastly, guys, you will need you some tracing paper. You want this tracing paper so that if you're using a store-bought pattern, even if you're using a pattern that you made yourself, if you need to make some corrections to the original pattern, but you're not sure if those corrections are going to be 100% correct, I would whip out this tracing paper, put it on top of my pattern, and go ahead and trace it out and have you a separate pattern from the original pattern, so that you wouldn't be losing or messing up your original sewing pattern. Now, this last thing I'm going to show you, you don't necessarily have to have it as a beginner, but eventually you will use it. But it's called an owl, okay? It has a sharp end on this side, and you can use this to punch holes into your fabric to be able to put in snaps, eyelets, and all those kind of things. But you can also use this as an extra finger. Sometimes you're sewing thick fabrics and it may be hard. You may need to push it under. I don't like to put my finger near that needle, because I've seen too many people come with pictures showing that they done sewed their finger, and I don't want to know what that feel like. So baby, I whip this thing out and I use this as a finger to push my fabric through, because it's sharp enough, it's strong enough, and if the needle accidentally hit it, it's not my finger. So guys, that quick. It took us what, 5 minutes to go through all the sewing tools that you will need on your everyday basis. That's how many things you need. This many. You only need about 10 items for your everyday sewing projects. And most of these things are cheap. You can go and get them from Walmart, Joann's, things like that. But guys, I'm going to give you a secret. I like to get my things as cheap as I can. So I use a coupon all the time at Joann. And even on my sewing needles that you can see right here, these denim and microtex, I got these for $1 and $1.50 on clearance at Walmart. You don't have to pay an arm and a leg for these sewing tools. So never just buy the first ones you see. Always see if you can get a deal or if you can use a coupon. But if you have any other questions on any other sewing tools that you may need for other projects, let me know in the comments. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget, I'm Blue, and I'm with you, and I'll see you later, Gator.